Welcome to CATA TV. I'm Russ Roberts, Senior Vice President, Tax and Finance with CATA. Today we are going to be talking with Kay James. She is one of the country's experts on software claims in the SR&ED program. It is an opportunity to understand the changes that are occurring with the way CRA is approaching these claims, their rather rigid approach and the impacts of it. But also it's going to be an opportunity to talk about with her ideas of how to approach these changes to get the best result.
Certainly there's been a shift in the way that reviewers go about evaluating claims, and I think it's a question not of an actual change in the legislation or anything of that nature, but it is a change in the way that the focus is on written evidence rather than that being an afterthought. A few years ago, reviewers were mostly interested in talking to the people in the company, the technical people. That's how they got a view of what was going on with the work. That's how they made their decisions. And then they would look for some paperwork to back up the claim. Now, for many of them, and certainly this is the way it's set out in the manuals that the reviewers use, the strategy of starting with the written material from the time the work was done and only talking to people after that has been exhaustively examined, that seems to be the way that quite a few of the reviewers do prefer to do things these days. And sometimes to the extent that they're only really interested in the paperwork. And unless that provides a good, clear picture of eligible work, they are not really interested in looking any further. Because, of course, if there is not a strong body of evidence to support everything that's claimed, it's going to be disallowed anyway. So there's not a lot of point wasting time checking on eligibility. That's why I say that now, certainly, eligibility and evidence are two sides of the coin. And for a claim to be successful, it needs to meet both of those requirements.
Certainly in the past, in my experience, if a claim was eligible, I was given the latitude to try to develop through the interviews why the claim was correctly filed. And my understanding is that today this is not necessarily happening in all the claims, and certainly there are companies getting caught by this.
Yes, certainly if you look at the material that CRA puts out as guidelines, it is a requirement that there is support for everything that's claimed. I think at one time it used to be much more the material things that were expected to be supported. Obviously you wouldn't be claiming a capital expense without having the receipts for it. So it was always a requirement that there was paperwork to support the financial claim.
I would certainly agree with you, Kay. What seems to me has happened now is that they have focused as well, the technical reviewers, on the documentation that supports what occurred in the analytical experimental process. Does this make any sense?
They're certainly looking for evidence of everything, and that includes the thought processes of the people doing the work and what they intended to do, what their hypotheses were, how they planned to do it. At one time they would have, as we said, find that out through technical meetings and discussions, but now it's really expected that that will be available on paper. And if you don't have that paperwork, anyone who puts in a claim without a strong supporting body of material risks having that claim disallowed. It's certainly not sure. Some reviewers, they do have flexibility, but some of them are being quite strict about this. And to not have that paperwork available, it's a risk.
Could you summarize for us then what you actually, very simply, what are the 4 or 5 key changes? Just we've gone through them here.
Well, the legislation has not changed. I mean, the definition is still the same, everything's still the same. But a few things are now being done differently. And I think probably the most significant is that the books and records legislation, which has been in place for a long time and has always been understood as applying to the financial parts of the claim, CRA now are applying that to every aspect of the claim, and so they are requiring that there's a complete record for everything that's being claimed. And when I say being claimed, I mean not just that the work was done by the people that are being claimed, etc., but that the nature of the work was such as to meet the requirements of the program. Other things, over the years, the requirement that there had to be sufficient information for a claim to be reviewed has subtly changed, and now it's been rephrased, and now the requirement is that it must be substantiated, and so work that is not substantiated cannot won't receive the tax credit. And other changes just in the way things are done. It used to be that there was special treatment for first-time claimants. A company making its first claim would usually get a bit of a pass on the documentation. They would have an explanation of what was required at the first claim and expected to comply in the future. Whereas now CRA have decided you can't really argue that the program has been going so long that everyone now is expected to be aware of the requirements.
Does that explain why now 70% of claims have to be done by consultants?
I think there's a lot to it there, that when people realise just what is involved, they decide that they don't have the time or expertise in the company, and it's not a skill they want to develop, and so they will hire a consultant. Or maybe they've tried it without and found it didn't work so very well, and now I've had to turn to somebody for help.
I'm also hearing, Kay, and in my discussions with you, that there is a greater focus on the company being able to show that they had in their mind the technological advancements, that they had an intent to achieve technological advancements and to actually solve uncertainties as this project occurred, not after the fact. Does this make any sense, or is it real?
Absolutely. It's not SR&ED work. It's not work that fits the description and the definition of SR&ED unless people are not only doing the work but are doing it purposefully, are aware of the obstacle that they're trying to overcome, are aware of the technological advance that they're trying to make, and are going about it deliberately and with all of those things that they have front of their minds. It has to be an experiment in the not just in the abstract, not added on as an afterthought. There has to be deliberately setting out to try to do this.
Okay, as you talk about evidence, and when you've talked to me, you've talked about contemporaneous documentation or support for the claim and the generation of it. Where does this fit into the normal engineering development process and the way they're documented, or the software engineering process and the way they are conducted? What are the implications for the companies?
It actually doesn't fit all that well. The advice that CRA used to give, that documentation generated in the normal course of doing the work should normally be sufficient. They dropped that from their guidelines. The last time it was in there was in 2008. Now it really is admitted by everybody concerned that you do need to take special steps to make sure that you are documented. It's not something that will, for most companies, just happen as in their normal course of business.
Kate, at this point, I would like to move forward and listen to your ideas about the solutions, what companies have to do about this.
Right. I think once we've accepted that this is how things are, it really is necessary to have an evidence record. Now we're going to look at the practicalities of just how we go about doing that. One very important thing to remember is nothing that's produced after the work was done has any value whatsoever as evidence. The term that's used by CRA is contemporaneous evidence. That's contemporaneous with the project that's being claimed. And so a little bit before sometimes work, something that was written down and that talked about intentions, that may be part of it. But anything that came after the technological advance was either achieved or abandoned, that is, after the end of the SR&ED project, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And so really there's an opportunity here, because if this exercise of generating the right paperwork is done at the right time, then that's enormously valuable. And if the opportunity to do it is squandered, then it's very risky for the claim.
As a final comment, we're seeing a lot of companies that have encountered problems. At the same time, these credits are extremely important to cash flow. And a lot of companies are making the effort to change their approaches to filing.
Yes, and I think it's well worth their while to do so. And if you think about the lens people have to go to get capital or financing in other ways, people seem to be prepared to do whatever it takes to get, say, an IRAP grant or venture capital. They will not balk at the paperwork there. So I think this is just something people have to get used to, accept that this is how things are now, and do what is necessary, because the payoff is so important. And so looking at this in a practical point of view for the companies, I would say that the first thing to do is to do an inventory of the paperwork or work product, whatever you want to call it, everything that is now currently being generated while the company goes about its business. And then take a look at what CRA requires, and that is in fact set out quite clearly in the form of a table in the guide to the Form T661. That's a publication that's available on CRA's website, and you can download it or read it online. But I would recommend that you look at this table number 1, I believe it is, because that sets out as the heads of the columns the points that you will be expected to substantiate for each project. And then down the left-hand side there are suggestions for material that might be useful as a reference or as evidence in those cases. And so if you start to fill in the table, it does show you where there are spots in the evidence record that you have for that project. You certainly don't need to have something in each of the rows, but you do need to have something in each of the columns. And now, having seen what's there already, the next step is to look at what can be done to fill in the gaps. Now, sometimes some of the company's existing reports can be a few more questions added, or a few extras put in so that they will be useful sources of evidence. Sometimes completely new report generation will have to be put into place. One thing that I've found to be very helpful is to have somebody write a weekly, or at the very most monthly, a report on what's going on with the project. Now, that can be retrospective. You can't justify the project at the end of the project, but if you do this at the end of each period, write down what went on with the project, what milestones, achievements, new obstacles, and of course at the beginning it has to include what we were trying to do and what difficulties were anticipated. And also at the same time, this report can include which of the team worked on it during that time. This is absolutely worth its weight in gold. And the person who should be doing this is the project manager. This has to be done at that level.
Okay, is there another aspect, certainly in my experience, I've encountered it. And that is, when we talk about the project, I understand you're talking about the SR&ED project. And most companies are actually focused on the commercial project. This distinction, would you like to go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. And of course they're focused on the product development. That's what companies do. And this is a kind of adjustment of how people look at the work that they're doing, because what's claimed as a SR&ED project is not the same as the product development project. And this is one of the most common sources for claims not working, is that people are trying to claim what's actually a product development project.
So in summary, first step really is to know your SR&ED project and how it is distinguished, and how to distinguish it from the commercial project. And listening to you, that's the job of the project manager, and then to get this down coherently.
Yes, certainly the project manager needs to be involved, but also at that stage someone who understands the SR&ED program. And the first thing to do is to identify what's the objective of the project. And once you know that, then you can differentiate, is this a commercial objective? Is it a technological objective? And that's something that just needs a little bit of practice or a bit of familiarity with the program.
Thanks, Kay. Well, this ends this session of CATA TV. I'd like to remind everybody of the SR&ED, the CATA SR&ED LinkedIn website. This group has an extensive discussion of the program. It expands on many of the ideas that Kay has covered, and I'm sure that Kay will be participating in those discussions with you in on the ongoing discussions that occur there. Thank you.